This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform. More about them later in this video. Welcome back to Biographics. I'm your host, Cosmic Horror Madman Eric Malachite, and today's script was written by Radu Alexander. So be sure to show him some love in the comments, and let's get to it. In 550 BC, Cyrus the Great founded the Achaemenid, or First Persian Empire. It reached the peak of its power under rulers such as Darius and Xerxes, becoming the largest empire that the world had ever seen up until that point. And a shameless plug here, we have bios on all three ready and waiting for you. After Xerxes was assassinated in 465 BC though, the kingdom began experiencing a slow decline. Following a series of ineffectual rulers, it seemed like the empire was slowly but surely crawling to its inevitable demise. But not so fast, said Artaxerxes II, who tried to reach the same heights as his lauded ancestors and restore the grandeur of the Achaemenid Empire. So, did he succeed? Well, spoiler alert if you're in a hurry, no. Alexander the Great conquered the Achaemenid Empire 3 decades after Artaxerxes' death, but let's press on anyway. Who knows, maybe this time the ending will be different. Artaxerxes II was born Arsaces, sometimes also called Arcicus or Orsis, circa 445 BC as the eldest son of King Darius and his queen consort Parysatis. He had an older sister and a ton of younger siblings, but the one worth mentioning because he would play an important role was Cyrus, historically referred to as Cyrus the Younger to distinguish him from his famous ancestor. All the sources we have on Arsaces, such as Xenophon, Plutarch, and Ctesias, are Greek. Therefore, they mainly cover his reign as king and not so much his early years. Although Plutarch gives a little description contrasting the two brothers, calling Cyrus high-strung and impetuous, while Arsaces seemed gentler in everything and naturally milder in his impulses. We know that Arsaces married a woman named Statira before he ascended to the throne, the daughter of a nobleman named Hydarnes. Although this was intended as a diplomatic marriage requested by King Darius, it seemed that there was true love between Arsaces and Statira. At one point, King Darius discovered a plot against him, orchestrated by Statira's brother, Taritukmus, and decided that the entire family should be put to death. At that point, Arsaces threw himself at his mother's feet with tears in his eyes and begged his parents to spare his wife, and they did. As the oldest brother, Arsaces was expected to become the new king after his father died. Cyrus had other ideas though, and if Plutarch is to be believed, so did his mother, who had more love for Cyrus and wished that he should succeed to the throne. She even tried to persuade her husband to name Cyrus as his heir instead of Arsaces, but to no avail. In 404 BC, Darius II died, and Arsaces succeeded him as the new king of the Achaemenid Empire, adopting the regal name of Artaxerxes II, referred to by the Greeks as Artaxerxes Minimon. There was certainly no love lost between the two brothers, and Cyrus tried to have the new king assassinated on the day of his royal initiation. Allegedly. We wouldn't want to slander his good name without solid proof. An official named Tissaphernes exposed the plot to Artaxerxes, himself having heard it from a priest who taught Cyrus as a child. How he found out, we will never know. But apparently Cyrus planned to lie in wait during the ceremony until his brother was alone in the sanctuary and then pounce on him while he was dressing in the ceremonial garments. What a coward. So not exactly a master plan, which is why some historians think it is just as likely that Artaxerxes made the whole thing up as an excuse to get rid of his pesky little brother. Unsurprisingly, Cyrus was sentenced to death for this transgression, real or not. He was about to become a head shorter, but then it came time for Parysatis to plead at her son's feet to spare Cyrus's life, the same way Artaxerxes had done in the past so she would have mercy on his wife. And against the king's better judgment, his mother's entreaties softened his heart and he relented. Cyrus would live and hopefully put aside his resentment for his brother and his ambitions for the throne. We're sure that is exactly what is about to happen. If you want to make sure your business's struggle isn't futile, then you're going to need an awesome website. And the sponsor for today's video, Squarespace, has you covered. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform, perfect for entrepreneurs with wares to sell, bloggers with a message to spread, and artists looking to reach the masses with their work. Whether you're just starting out, you're looking for a way to better manage your brand, or trying to unite your people under one banner, Squarespace makes it easy for you to create beautiful professional websites, engage with your audience, and make sure the right people are getting your message. Squarespace's Fluid engine makes it easier than ever for pretty much anyone to dive in and make a beautiful website. Answer a few questions about the goals you'd like to accomplish with your site, choose a template, and get dragging and dropping elements onto your template. Drag and drop technology is included in every Squarespace site. With Squarespace Blueprint and their new AI and SEO tools, you'll be able to create a fully personalized website using this guided design system. Choose from a professionally curated list of layout and design options and build a unique presence from the ground up. And with their SEO tools, you'll have all the tools you need so the algorithm will never leave you in the dust. And best of all, if you're looking to sell stuff on your website, you'll be able to offer a simple yet seamless checkout experience with Squarespace's powerful tools. You'll be able to accept credit cards, PayPal, Apple Pay, and in eligible countries, offer customers the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. Ready to get started? Check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/biographics to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. You'll be surprised that that was not what happened. As soon as Cyrus was safe from his brother's grasp, he began plotting against Artaxerxes again. In fact, he had already been preparing for a while. Back when King Darius was still alive, he put Cyrus in charge of several provinces known as satrapies in Asia Minor, in the western part of the Achaemenid kingdom, and this placed him in direct contact with the Greeks. Now, Persia and Greece had a complicated relationship at the time, to say the least. Sure, Cyrus's ancestors tried to conquer the Greeks a few times, most notably his great-great-grandpappy Xerxes, but at the moment Persia was content with using its money and power to exert influence over the Greek world instead of brute force. Plus, the Greeks were busy with the Peloponnesian War, which pitted Sparta's Peloponnesian League against the Delian League led by Athens. When it came to choose a side to support, Persia chose Sparta, particularly a general named Lysander, and if you want to get the story from the Greek perspective, our bio on Lysander is probably out by now. If not, stay tuned. Anyway, Lysander and Cyrus got on pretty well, and the Persian satrap funded the Spartan army, with the understanding, of course, that they would return the favor when he decided to take up arms against his brother. That time came in 401 BC when Cyrus mustered all his troops at Sardis and went to war against Artaxerxes. It's tricky to say who benefited the empire more as ruler. Both Plutarch and Xenophon seem to agree that Cyrus was the superior military leader. Plutarch said that affairs demanded Cyrus, a man who had a brilliant spirit surpassing skill in war, and great love for his friends, and that the magnitude of the empire required a king of lofty purpose and ambition. Moreover, along with much high-sounding talk about himself, he said he carried a sturdier heart than his brother, was more of a philosopher, better versed in the wisdom of the Magi, and could drink and carry more wine than he. His brother, he said, was too effeminate and cowardly either to sit his horse in a hunt or his throne in a time of peril. Xenophon, meanwhile, was actually a general in Cyrus's army, so, no prizes for guessing who he preferred. He described him as a man the kingliest and most worthy to rule of all the Persians who have lived since the elder Cyrus. The Persian folk, however, seemed to like Artaxerxes better because he had that whole man of the people persona going. Again, Plutarch tells of a moment when the king was making a trip and everyone was walking up to him with gifts. One laborer who had nothing to give quickly ran to the river, took some water in his hands, and offered it to the king. This gesture so moved Artaxerxes that he rewarded the man with a gold goblet and 1,000 darics, aka Persian coins. The historian also mentions how Artaxerxes preferred to sit and dine with his family, his mother, his wife, and his brothers who weren't Cyrus, even though the king normally never shared his table. And his wife had the same vibe. But what gratified the Persians most of all was the sight of his wife Statira's carriage, which always appeared with its curtains up, and thus permitted the women of the people to approach and greet the queen. This made her beloved of the common folk. But whatever, Cyrus had little interest in the will of the people. He set off with his troops in the spring of 401 BC under the pretense of leading a military expedition to deal with a troublesome tribe known as the Pisidians. His army consisted of the Persian forces rallied from his satrapies and his allies, which were led by a general named Ariaeus, plus a large force of Greek mercenaries known as the Army of the 10,000, led, among others, by the Athenian general and historian Xenophon. Well, according to him, they actually numbered around 10,400, but that didn't have the same ring to it. Later, the Spartans also joined the fray since they owed Cyrus for helping them win the Peloponnesian War, and they were led by General Clearchus of Sparta. With that kind of muscle behind Cyrus, it's not surprising that most satrapies wanted nothing to do with him and submitted without a fight. He might have been able to take Artaxerxes completely by surprise if not for Tissaphernes again coming in to save the day for his king. Since he was the satrap of Lydia at the time, located on the western edge of the Achaemenid Empire, he received word of Cyrus's advances and managed to warn Artaxerxes in time. But the king did not rush to battle, instead allowing Cyrus to continue marching towards the capital of Babylon. At one point, Artaxerxes even permitted the opposing army to pass through a long and dangerous trench, which would have been the perfect spot for an ambush. He would have preferred to take the fighting back to Persia proper, where his soldiers outnumbered the enemy, but his generals persuaded the king that waiting that long and ceding so much territory would have been a mistake. Finally, Artaxerxes rallied the troops he had at his disposal and met Cyrus in the Battle of Cunaxa on the left bank of the Euphrates. Cyrus would have won this battle were it not for his blind hatred for his brother. Everything was going his way. Clearchus managed to push back the opposing left wing. Cyrus personally slayed one of his brother's top generals in battle, a man named Artaxerxes. Xenophon claimed that his Greek mercenaries were doing so well that their only casualty was one guy who got shot by an arrow, and even he survived. But there's no point in us talking about it, let's hear it from the guy who was actually there on the scene. Cyrus, riding past at some distance from the lines, glanced his eye first in the direction and then in the other, so as to take a complete survey of his friends and foes. While he was still speaking, he heard a confused murmur passing through the ranks and asked what it meant. The other replied that it was the watchword being passed down for the second time. Cyrus asked what the watchword was. On being told it was Zeus our savior and victory, he replied, "I accept it, so let it be," and with that remark rode away to his position. Some say they clashed their shields and spears, thereby causing terror to the horses, and before they had got within arrow shot, the barbarians swerved and took to flight. And now the Hellenes gave chase with might and main, checked only by shouts to one another not to race but to keep their ranks. The enemy's chariots reft of their charioteers swept onward, some through the enemy themselves, others past the Hellenes. Cyrus, seeing the Hellenes conquering and in hot pursuit, was well content, but in spite of his joy in the salutations offered him at that moment by those about him, as though he were already king, he was not led away to join in the pursuit, but keeping his squadron of 600 horsemen in close order, waited and watched to see what the king himself would do. The king, he knew, held the center of the Persian army, and seeing that no one offered him battle in front, nor yet the troops in front of him, he wheeled as if to encircle the enemy. It was then that Cyrus, in apprehension lest the king might get round to the rear and cut to pieces the Hellenic body, charged to meet him. Attacking with his 600, he mastered the line of troops in front of the king and put to flight the 6,000, cutting down, as it said, with his own hand their general Artaxerxes. But Cyrus gave it all up once he was face to face with his brother, and charged at him like a raging bull with murderous fury in his eyes. He was speared to death for his troubles, although who delivered the killing blow depends on who you believe. Personally, we prefer Plutarch's version, who said that the killer was a native of Caria, who was then rewarded by the king for this exploit with the privilege of always carrying a golden cock upon his spear in front of the line during an expedition. For the Persians call the Carians themselves cocks because of the crests with which they adorn their helmets. Yes, we know, we're 12 years old. Afterward, Artaxerxes personally mutilated his brother's body, but had his head and hands chopped off so he could show them off during his celebrations. Apparently, both Cyrus's killer and the man who cut off his head were later punished by his mother, Persica, who had them tortured, flayed alive, and crucified. Artaxerxes had won the day and was still king. However, the battle itself had been a draw at best, and there was still the matter of that large Greek force still wreaking havoc through his lands. The Greeks stopped fighting when they heard that Cyrus was dead, but now they found themselves strangers in a strange land, without a purpose, without food, and most importantly, without anyone paying them. Remember that the bulk of the Greek force consisted of mercenaries, and did they work on contingency? No. Money down. Pay me. Artaxerxes wanted them gone, and it was Tissaphernes again who orchestrated the matter. First, he persuaded Artaxerxes to make peace with the Persian generals who rebelled against him, like Arrhaeus, as long as they were willing to betray the Greeks. Then these generals persuaded their Greek counterparts that the king would make peace with them as well, and invited them to a feast. Many of them attended. Clearchus did, but Xenophon didn't. There was no food to be had, however. Instead, they were all put in chains and later executed. Kinda like the Red Wedding, I guess. The commanders were dead, but the Persians wanted to avoid meeting the army in another head-on battle. So they let the Greeks march out of the Achaemenid Empire, mostly hoping that they would starve to death along the way. And almost half of them did, but the others made it back home to Greece with a renewed hatred of the Persians. Okay, so the mercenaries were out of Persia. That was one problem solved for Artaxerxes, but that still left the Spartans. The 10,000 might have been mercenaries, but the Spartans weren't, and they went to war against Persia even though Persia funded their victory against Athens in the Peloponnesian War. Sure, they did it to help another Persian, but shockingly, Artaxerxes still saw it as a betrayal that needed to be answered. As it happened, he didn't need to wait, because the Spartans made the first move. In 398 BC, an army led by Spartan king Achaemenid II invaded Ionia, a disputed region on the western coast of Anatolia that contained Greek cities under Persian rule. Then he advanced into Lydia, where Tissaphernes was satrap and successfully attacked the capital of Sardis. For his failure to stop the Spartans, Tissaphernes was executed in 395 BC. That's what loyalty gets you, I guess. It looked like the Spartans had the run of the place, but there was one thing that worked in Artaxerxes' favor. He knew that whatever Greek city-state you picked, there was always at least another one that hated them because those Greeks sure were a contentious people. Artaxerxes looked at who hated Sparta then and didn't have to look very far. There was Athens, of course. There was always Athens, but there was also Thebes, which as the leader of the Boeotian League was a growing regional power that nearly matched that of Athens and Sparta. And Corinth, an original member of the Peloponnesian League. Artaxerxes decided to employ the same strategy his brother used with the Spartans, but this time use it against them. Simply pay others to fight them. Artaxerxes sent a man named Timocrates to Greece with a big ol' sack of shiny gold coins to stir up some anti-Spartan sentiment. It worked, and before you knew it, Achaemenid had been summoned back home because the other city-states were gearing up to declare war on Sparta. He lamented that the king has driven me out of Asia with 30,000 archers. An archer referring to a Persian coin because, you guessed it, it had an archer stamped on it. In 395 BC, the Corinthian War erupted. At first, Artaxerxes was simply the money man in the shadows, letting the Greeks do all the work, but he soon decided that it was better for Persia to have a physical presence in the war. So he sent out an army led by a satrap named Anabasis. This paid off almost immediately because a joint naval force led by Anabasis and Athenian general Conon, no, not Conan like the barbarian, absolutely annihilated the Spartan fleet at Cnidus in 394 BC and ended any chance of Sparta becoming a naval power. The Spartans found better success on land though, and Achaemenid defeated the Thebans at Cornea that same year. This conflict went on for a while, and the next few years were a little more subdued. The Persians kept leading coastal raids on the Peloponnese. Athens was busy rebuilding its defenses with Persian permission after having its walls torn down during the Peloponnesian War. Corinth was experiencing infighting between two different parties, and the Spartans, quite uncharacteristically, tried using diplomacy on the Persians and sent a silver-tongued emissary named Antalcidas to meet with Artaxerxes. The diplomatic overture didn't work, for now, and the fighting resumed a few years later, but with less direct interference from Persia. Athens regained a lot of ground that it had lost during the Peloponnesian War, and strangely enough, this ended up working against it. You see, Artaxerxes didn't actually care about Athens beating Sparta. He just wanted Sparta weakened to the point that it was no longer a threat to him, but not if that meant that Athens simply took its place. Artaxerxes didn't want any Greek city strong enough to challenge his authority, so in 387 BC, he forced both sides to make peace, threatening to switch teams if Athens didn't comply. And thus, the King's Peace, aka the Peace of Antalcidas, was reached. Artaxerxes got everything he wanted. Athens ceded a lot of territories it had won. Corinth and Argos, which had united during the war, were forced to separate. The Boeotian League, led by Thebes, was forced to disband, and all of Ionia was under Persian control again. Artaxerxes had succeeded where his more famous ancestors had failed and placed Greece and the Aegean Sea under his complete hegemony. Artaxerxes had emerged triumphant out of his first two major conflicts. For a while, it looked like he had a shot of reclaiming the Achaemenid Empire's former glory, but things went down for him pretty fast. For decades, Egypt had been a thorn in Persia's side. Conquered in 529 BC, it had rebelled against Achaemenid rule several times, including during the reign of Artaxerxes' father. By the time Artaxerxes came to the throne, only Upper Egypt was still under his control, and even this didn't last long, because a pharaoh named Nectanebo I emerged, the founder of the 30th dynasty, and he united all of Egypt and revolted against Persia around 379 BC. It took Artaxerxes a long time to get ready, too long. It wasn't until 373 BC that he sent an army of Persians and Greeks to put down the revolt, and things didn't go his way. All that extra time allowed Nectanebo to strengthen his defenses considerably. The army had to take a long and treacherous route along the Nile during the annual flood to reach Memphis, only to discover that the city was heavily fortified. Add to this the fact that the Persians and the Greeks did not get along at all, and the end result was a failed military expedition that gave up and returned home without even a single fight. Things got even worse for Artaxerxes, as several of his own satraps believed that he had gotten too old and weak to rule and rebelled against him. It all started with a satrap named Anabasis, who had been tasked by Artaxerxes with leading a new expedition against Egypt. Instead, he turned on the king and allied with Nectanebo. He was later joined by 4 other satraps, all from the western part of the empire, and even received help from the Greeks, who weren't fans of Artaxerxes either, for obvious reasons. The odds were stacked against the Persian king, but ultimately he emerged triumphant not because of anything he did, but because the opposing side had no unified vision or leadership. One satrap tried to play both sides, another kept funds meant for the war for himself, a third was betrayed and killed by his son, and so on. Meanwhile, Egypt was dealing with its own succession crisis, and the Greek city-states started fighting each other again, so they never sent the aid they promised, and the satrap's revolt officially ended in 362 BC when Anabasis was assassinated. Artaxerxes ended up winning this conflict too, but it showed everyone that the Achaemenid Empire wasn't what it used to be. Artaxerxes tried his best, but now he was an old man and it was time for his successor to pick up where he left off. And his heirs fought over power just like he and Cyrus did, even though this weakened the empire. And this time, it was 4 brothers who wanted the throne. One was executed, one committed suicide, one was murdered, and the 4th one emerged as Artaxerxes III after his father died in 358 BC. And who knows, if you like this video, maybe we'll cover him too. I hope you learned something today. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to deploy your like, subscribe to the channel, drop us a membership, more info coming soon about that, and comment your favorite Roman, Greek, or Persian war from ancient history. I'm Eric Malachite, and I'll see you next time, Space Cowboy.